"Mom, if you come to my wedding, you'll only embarrass me." Those cruel words cut through Clara Johnson's heart like a knife. Imagine, after 62 years of sacrifice, after walking miles in worn-out shoes, after going hungry so her children could eat, this was how her son repaid her. Can you picture giving your entire life to someone only to be told that your presence would bring them shame? What would you do in her place? Cry, break, or rise stronger? Friends, before we begin this powerful story of sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption, tell me in the comments, how does this moment make you feel? And as always, I wish you a blessed day ahead. The story begins on a humid summer morning in New Orleans, Louisiana, the air heavy with the scent of magnolia trees mixed with the distant salt from the Gulf. Time has weathered the city streets, cracked sidewalks leading past shotgun houses with peeling paint, and yet life persists with the resilience only the South can teach. It is here, in a small two-room apartment on the edge of Treme, that Clara Johnson, a 62-year-old widow, awakens each day. Though the years have bowed her back slightly and silvered her curls, Clara remains a steady presence, defined not by comfort but by perseverance. From the previous hardships that shaped her life, nothing has changed. Her children still remain at the center of her existence, and every sunrise reminds her of what she has already given and what she is willing to give again. Clara is tall but thin, her frame marked by decades of labor, her shoulders rounded in a subtle stoop that tells the quiet story of fatigue. Her hair, a crown of tightly coiled curls streaked heavily with gray, is pulled back neatly into a bun at the nape of her neck, the style of a woman who values order even in the face of scarcity. She wears her usual cardigan, a long brown one that is frayed at the edges but still shields her from the early chill, layered over a plain gray dress that brushes against her ankles. At her feet are a pair of black flats, scuffed and worn down at the soles, yet sturdy enough to carry her on her daily route. Around her neck, resting lightly on her shoulders, is her most familiar accessory. A faded beige scarf, its fabric thin from years of use, but one she refuses to discard, for it feels like a piece of memory she cannot let go of. The small kitchen where she moves is filled with quiet sounds, the scrape of a metal pan on the stove, the faint creak of the old wooden floor beneath her weight, and the soft hum of a hymn escaping her lips. Clara has sung these tunes for decades, sometimes to drown the sound of her own hunger, sometimes to comfort her children when there was not enough food on the table. She prepares a simple breakfast, half a piece of cornbread, a little tea, yet sets it aside for Marcus and Danielle, her two children, as though her body no longer requires what her heart insists must be provided for them. It has become her ritual, the silent way she ensures they never truly feel the emptiness she carries in her own stomach. Marcus, now a grown man far from her kitchen, was once a little boy with eager eyes, watching his mother walk miles in those same black flats to scrub offices downtown. Danielle, now a young woman climbing the corporate ladder, had once been a small girl clutching her mother's cardigan, staring at the world with questions Clara could not always answer. But in these younger years, the children did not yet know the depth of the sacrifices made for them. Clara walked to her cleaning job every evening, 4 miles in each direction, because bus fare meant fewer coins left for milk or notebooks. She returned late at night with aching legs, only to rise before dawn and care for other people's children during the day, her own children sitting quietly in a corner, understanding even in their innocence that Mama needed them to be strong. Clara's endurance did not pass unnoticed. Among her co-workers was Maria Sanchez, a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes, olive skin weathered by the Louisiana sun, and a warmth that drew people close. Maria, a fellow cleaner, carried herself with a lighter step, but she watched Clara with admiration and sadness. Where others saw only an old woman in a worn cardigan, Maria saw someone remarkable, someone who could paint joy over despair. She remembered one afternoon when Clara's daughter Danielle came home with shoes so torn the sole flapped with every step. Instead of sighing or breaking down, Clara took a black marker from her apron and drew delicate flowers across the fabric. "Now, these are the prettiest shoes in school," she told her daughter, smiling with such conviction that Danielle's shame melted into pride. Maria witnessed the transformation, how Clara could take humiliation and turn it into strength, and in that moment, she knew Clara possessed a rare kind of power. The nights were hardest. Clara would hum old gospel songs in the dim kitchen light, stirring pots of beans or rice that seemed too small to feed three. When her children asked why she did not sit to eat with them, she would chuckle softly and say she had already eaten while cooking. But when the lights went out, Maria, who lived a few blocks away, sometimes heard Clara's stomach growl when she stopped by to return a borrowed pan or check in. To cover the sound, Clara would laugh and turn up the little radio on the counter, swaying gently as though she were dancing with ghosts of better times. Maria never mentioned it directly, but her heart ached every time she walked back home, knowing her friend went to bed hungry so her children could fall asleep with full bellies. Maria herself was no stranger to hardship. Twice divorced and raising a teenage son who had dropped out of school, she had learned to be sharp and resilient, but she confessed she did not have Clara's gift of turning suffering into grace. "You're like iron wrapped in silk," Maria once told her as they folded laundry together at the laundromat. Clara laughed, brushing it off, but Maria meant it. The more she watched Clara, the more she understood that the woman was carrying more than just physical burdens. She was holding on to dignity for her children's sake, ensuring they never felt less than anyone else. One winter evening, Clara came home after an 18-hour stretch cleaning downtown offices all night, then babysitting toddlers through the morning hours, followed by scrubbing the marble floors of a wealthy family's mansion in the Garden District. She opened the door to her apartment with trembling hands, exhaustion written into every line of her body. Yet when she saw Marcus and Danielle sitting on the floor, waiting for her with school books open and questions about their homework, she forced a smile, set down her bag, and joined them. Her cardigan hung loosely from her shoulders, the beige scarf slipping slightly, but she straightened it as though dressing herself for something greater than weariness. Maria arrived soon after with a pot of caldo she had made, insisting Clara take half for her children. Together they laughed, sharing stories of the day, though beneath the laughter lingered an unspoken truth. Clara's sacrifices were quietly consuming her health. Still, Clara pressed on. Her children wore second-hand clothes from church donations, but they were always pressed and clean because she spent evenings ironing them by hand. They carried lunches wrapped carefully in reused paper, but each was packed with care. Neighbors often marveled that the Johnson children looked proud and well-kept despite their poverty. "Mama, why can't we have new shoes like the other kids?" Danielle once asked, her eyes on the sneakers held together with duct tape. Clara knelt down, took her daughter's face in her tired hands, and whispered, "Baby girl, new shoes won't make you run faster or jump higher. What matters is where your feet take you and how you get there." She then drew small patterns with her marker again, turning the shoes into something unique. Danielle smiled, her doubt erased. Maria, standing in the doorway, felt tears well in her eyes at the sight. And so life continued in this rhythm. Clara sacrificing, Maria witnessing, both women holding each other afloat in their own ways. For Clara, the cardigan, the gray dress, the black flats, and the beige scarf became symbols of survival, not fashion. She wore them like armor, walking the streets of New Orleans as though carrying not just her own life but the future of her children on her narrow shoulders. And though her body bent slowly with age, her spirit refused to break. In the quiet corners of her small apartment, she whispered prayers that her children would someday understand. Not the hunger she endured, not the pain in her back or the calluses on her hands, but the love that made every sacrifice worth bearing. The years slipped by, carrying Clara's sacrifices into the distance like footprints washed away by the tide. The two children she had raised with empty stomachs and aching hands had become everything she once dreamed for them. Marcus was now a lawyer, his name etched on an office door in a sleek building downtown. Danielle wore tailored suits and heels that clicked confidently against marble floors, managing a bustling bank branch with authority in her voice. Their successes were the fruits of Clara's labor, but as they climbed higher, they began to leave her behind, as though her worn cardigan and faded scarf could tarnish the shine of their new lives. Clara, 62, still walked with the same stoop, her hair bound neatly into its silver bun, her gray dress pressed though its fabric had thinned. She imagined her children proud of her still, thankful for what she had endured. But gratitude was a currency rarely spent. Invitations grew fewer, phone calls shorter, and eventually Clara became a polite footnote mentioned, but never truly included. The higher Marcus and Danielle rose, the more they seemed to fear that their mother's poverty might cast a shadow on their hard-won reputations. On the morning of Danielle's wedding, The city of New Orleans shimmered with warmth. Bells echoed from St. Augustine's church, mingling with the fragrance of flowers hung in neat arrangements. Clara stood before her small mirror, adjusting her gray dress, slipping on her black flats, and wrapping her beige scarf snugly around her shoulders. She looked at herself for a long moment, an older woman, tired yet proud, and whispered a prayer that her daughter's joy would outshine everything else. With her cardigan buttoned and her heart swelling, she made her way to the church. Inside, the hall was alive with color and finery. Danielle, radiant in white lace, her smile wide beneath a veil of delicate embroidery, seemed to glow in the center of it all. Her groom, Michael Thompson, tall with sharp blue eyes and a suit that spoke of wealth, stood at her side with an expression of polished confidence. The guests whispered admiration for the couple, their words full of promise and bright futures. But when Clara stepped closer, carrying the soft warmth of her scarf and the lines of decades on her face, the atmosphere shifted. Michael's gaze flickered, scanning Clara from her worn flats to the cardigan fraying at the sleeves. He leaned toward Danielle, voice low but not enough to hide from Clara's ears. "Your mother looks so out of place. People might think she doesn't belong here." The words, meant to wound quietly, struck Clara like a blow. Danielle's lips parted as if to speak, but her eyes darted to the guests, then to her husband's unyielding face, and she froze. Marcus, standing near the head table in his dark suit, watched the exchange. His jaw tightened, his hand clenched around his glass, but he said nothing. Clara felt her breath catch. She forced a smile, her hand tightening around the ends of her scarf until her fingers trembled. "Congratulations," she whispered, her voice steady though her heart crumbled inside. She leaned forward briefly, then stepped back, as though distance was the only kindness she could offer. The music continued, laughter filled the air, but for Clara, every note rang hollow. She turned slowly and began walking toward the door, each step heavy, her shoulders bent lower under an invisible weight. Maria noticed immediately. Dressed in a simple navy dress, her dark eyes caught the sight of Clara slipping out into the courtyard. She hurried after her, the sound of her shoes tapping against stone until she reached her friend beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Clara stood there, holding her scarf close, her eyes glistening, but her lips curling into the faintest smile. "It's all right, Maria," Clara murmured, her voice soft, fragile. "Mothers, we get used to this. I'm not angry, just tired." She shook her head gently, as if to brush away Maria's concern, though her hand continued to clutch the scarf as though it were the only anchor she had left. Maria wanted to argue, to tell her she deserved better, but words caught in her throat. Instead, she stayed beside Clara, silent and steady, offering her presence in a moment when presence was all that mattered. Together, they stood beneath the tree, listening to the distant sound of celebration drifting from the church music that marked a new beginning for Danielle, and a quiet ending for the mother who had given everything for her children, only to find herself slipping further into their shadows. The days after Danielle's wedding hung over Clara like a lingering cloud. She returned to her small apartment in Tremé with a smile fixed upon her lips, but her heart carried the heaviness of a stone. Her children had grown into everything she once prayed for, yet the warmth she longed to find in their embrace was absent. She whispered to herself late at night that mothers learn to endure loneliness, but even endurance has limits, and her frail body began to betray her. Autumn settled over New Orleans with a sharpness in the wind, and with it came a storm that the city had been warned about for days. The air grew heavy, the sky darkened, and by late afternoon the first drops of rain began to beat down on the sidewalks. Clara had ventured out to pick up groceries, just enough rice, beans, and bread to last a few days, when the storm worsened. Thunder rolled like cannon fire above the rooftops, lightning split the sky into jagged shards, and sheets of rain poured down, soaking her cardigan until it clung heavily to her shoulders. Her beige scarf, already frayed, grew darker with water, wrapping around her like a damp shroud. She tried to quicken her steps, but the pounding in her chest grew louder than the thunder. Each breath felt sharper, her vision blurred, and before she could call for help, her knees buckled. Clara collapsed onto the wet pavement, her thin body curled against the concrete, her hair plastered with rain, her face pale beneath the storm's shadow. Passers-by hurried past with umbrellas, shielding themselves, barely noticing the figure of an old woman lying still by the roadside. It was Maria who found her. Having closed the small grocery store where she now worked part-time, Maria had been walking home with a raincoat pulled tight around her stocky frame. She froze at the sight of her friend crumpled on the ground, eyes closed, cardigan soaked through, scarf dragging in the water. "Clara!" she cried, dropping the bag in her hands and rushing forward. With the help of a young man who stopped at her desperate shouts, Maria managed to lift Clara into the back seat of a passing taxi. The driver, an older Haitian man with tired eyes, sped through flooded streets toward the hospital, the wipers beating frantically as though racing against death itself. At the hospital, Clara was rushed into emergency care. The fluorescent lights above painted her skin a sickly pale as doctors adjusted tubes and checked her pulse. Maria sat in the waiting area, wringing her hands, her mind replaying the image of her friend lying helpless in the rain. Hours passed before a physician, Dr. Lewis, a man in his late 40s, tall, dark-skinned, with gentle eyes hidden behind rectangular glasses, approached. He explained that Clara had suffered a heart episode, the result of long years of strain and untreated illness. She was stable for now, but rest and medication would be vital. Maria nodded, tears welling, relieved but anxious about how her friend could possibly afford the care. When Clara awoke the next morning, she found herself in a quiet hospital room, the scent of antiseptic heavy in the air. Her cardigan and scarf hung over a chair, still damp from the storm. Her hands trembled as she touched them, as though reaching for fragments of her identity. Maria sat nearby, smiling softly. "You gave us quite a scare," she said. Clara smiled faintly, whispering, "Guess it was just my turn to fall." Before Clara could say more, there was a knock at the door. A man entered, slender, dressed in a crisp gray suit carrying a briefcase polished to a shine. He was in his mid-50s, with thinning hair and a professional air that immediately set him apart from the sterile atmosphere of the hospital. Introducing himself as Richard Hall, an attorney from Baton Rouge, he explained he had urgent business with Clara. Confused, Clara sat up straighter, clutching the scarf that now rested across her lap. Mr. Hall explained that her older brother, Jeremiah Johnson, had passed away 2 weeks earlier in Texas. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Jeremiah had been estranged from the family for decades, drifting from one state to another after the death of their parents. Letters had stopped arriving, phone calls had ceased, and Clara had long believed she would never hear his name again. Now, here was this stranger telling her that Jeremiah was gone. But that was not the only news. Mr. Hall unfolded a set of documents, his tone calm and precise, yet carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room. Jeremiah, it turned out, had built a quiet fortune through land investments, small businesses, and oil leases. At the time of his death, his estate was valued at more than $40 million. And in his will, he had named his only surviving sister, Clara Johnson, as the sole heir. For a moment, Clara thought she had misheard. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She shook her head slowly, her curls loose and damp, eyes wide with disbelief. "$40 million?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Mr. Hall nodded, sliding the documents toward her. "Yes, ma'am. It is yours pending final probate. You have gone from surviving on scraps to becoming a wealthy woman." Clara sat frozen, staring at her trembling hands, then at her scarf, as if the worn fabric mocked the absurdity of what she had just been told. Rain still streaked the window outside, and she could hear the storm's wind rattling against the glass. "All my life," she murmured, "I wanted nothing but love, a warm meal for my children, a little peace. And now?" She trailed off, tears filling her eyes, not of joy, but of confusion, of awe, of a strange grief for all the years lost in hunger. Maria moved closer, gripping her friend's shoulder, whispering, "Clara, this is God's way of giving back what the world took from you." The news traveled faster than Clara expected. Within a day, Marcus appeared at the hospital, his suit immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, his voice dripping with concern. "Mom, I came as soon as I heard," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. His eyes, though, flickered with calculation as they scanned the attorney's briefcase lying on the table. Danielle arrived not long after, in a cream-colored dress and heels that clicked against the tile. She hugged her mother tightly, but when she pulled back, her gaze was sharp, curious, hungry. They both sat by her bed, their words overflowing with affection. Marcus reminisced about childhood memories he rarely mentioned before, while Danielle fussed over Clara's pillows and promised to arrange the best doctors. Yet beneath their sudden devotion lay another rhythm, one Clara could hear as clearly as the storm outside. They spoke not only of her recovery, but of possibilities, investments, properties, vacations. Marcus mentioned family trust funds. Danielle suggested joint planning. Their voices carried excitement, but not the kind born of love. It was the thrill of opportunity, of wealth that might finally align them with the privileged circles they craved. Clara listened silently, her beige scarf clutched tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale. The storm inside her heart raged louder than the one outside the hospital walls. She saw in their eager eyes not the children she had raised on prayers and second-hand shoes, but strangers blinded by the glitter of money. Her chest ached, not just from her weak heart, but from the realization that the love she had dreamed of receiving in return for her sacrifices had been swallowed by greed. She closed her eyes, letting their voices wash over her, each word widening the gulf between them. And in that quiet moment, sitting in a hospital bed with her cardigan still damp from the storm and $40 million suddenly thrust upon her, Clara understood that the wealth meant nothing if her children's love was lost. The weeks following the hospital stay passed in a haze of disbelief for Clara. She was now, by every measure, a wealthy woman, her name written into documents that spoke of millions she could scarcely comprehend. Yet as she sat in her modest apartment, cardigan draped around her shoulders, scarf looped gently at her neck, she felt no desire for the mansions advertised in glossy brochures, or the cars polished until they gleamed beneath the sun. She stared at her cracked walls and thought not of riches, but of children who had no walls at all. Children who slept beneath bridges. Children who had grown up as she had once raised Marcus and Danielle, in hunger, in fear, but without even a mother's arms to shield them. It was then the decision came, not loud or sudden, but quietly, like a prayer answered in the stillness of night. Clara would not spend her brother's fortune on herself. She would build something greater, something that could outlast her weary body and give meaning to the years of sacrifice. She envisioned a place where children forgotten by the world could find belonging, a house not just of bricks and wood, but of warmth and promise. And so, the House of Hope was born, first in her mind, then on paper with the help of Maria, and finally in the hands of architects and builders who looked at her with both curiosity and admiration. Here was a woman in a worn cardigan, speaking of millions, not to claim comfort, but to raise walls for those with none. Construction began on a piece of land outside the city, where oak trees spread their branches wide and the morning sun painted fields in gold. Workers hammered, sawed, and lifted beams, and Clara visited daily, her scarf fluttering in the wind, her gray dress brushing against dust and soil. The men respected her presence, nodding as she moved among them, sometimes offering sandwiches she had prepared, sometimes humming hymns that seemed to lighten their labor. Maria walked at her side, carrying notebooks, jotting down schedules, and often wiping her own tears at the sight of Clara pouring her fortune into the lives of children she had never met. By spring, the House of Hope stood complete. Sprawling home with bright windows, wide porches, and rooms filled with beds, bookshelves, and long tables waiting for meals. Clara walked through its halls for the first time, her hands sliding along the smooth wooden banister, her eyes shining as she imagined the sound of laughter filling the space. And soon it did. One by one, children began to arrive, thin boys with wary eyes, little girls clutching ragged dolls, siblings who held each other's hands as though they were the last anchors in a storm. Clara welcomed them all, kneeling to their level, brushing their hair back with trembling fingers, assuring them they were safe now. They called her Mama Clara before long. The name spread like sunlight through the house, carried in giggles, whispered in gratitude, shouted across the yard as they ran toward her. They clung to her gray dress, tugged at her cardigan, wrapped their arms around her legs, finding in her the mother they had been denied. Clara, once abandoned by her own children, now found herself surrounded by dozens of new ones, each heart stitching itself to hers. She fed them, guided them, tucked them into bed, and when nightmares woke them, she sat by their sides humming the same hymns she once sang to Marcus and Danielle. For the first time in many years, she felt full, not from food, but from the love that filled every corner of her being. The day of the grand opening arrived, marked by a simple but heartfelt ceremony. Town officials came, curious neighbors gathered, and the children lined the steps, their faces glowing with excitement. Clara stood at the front in her gray dress and scarf, her back slightly stooped but her presence radiating strength. She spoke softly but firmly, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This house is not mine. It belongs to every child who needs a place to belong. It belongs to love itself." The audience applauded, but the true applause came from the small hands that clapped beside her, the children who beamed at the woman who had become their anchor. Among the crowd stood Marcus and Danielle. They had come, not with warmth, but with unease, their expressions tight as they realized the inheritance they had expected to share was not theirs. They had assumed their mother would spend the money on comfort or leave it for them to manage, but the will of their uncle had been clear, and Clara's choices clearer still. They watched as strangers praised her, as children surrounded her, as she shone in the place where they thought only wealth could grant power. The sting of exclusion burned in their chests, mingling with shame they could not voice. Michael, Danielle's husband, muttered under his breath, "She wasted it." Marcus remained silent, his jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed turmoil. Danielle's painted lips trembled as she stared at the scarf her mother wore, the same one she had once been embarrassed of. But today, in front of dozens of people and countless children, that faded scarf seemed like a crown. Clara's eyes, glistening, met theirs across the courtyard. She saw their anger, their pain, and beneath it, the fragile shell of children she once carried through hunger and cold. After the ceremony, as children ran past, Clara approached them slowly. Her steps were unhurried, her face serene. She reached out, laying her trembling hand over Danielle's. "Love," she said gently, "is not words. It is action. I have given all I can and you still have time. You still have the chance to act, to show the love you carry inside. It isn't too late if you choose to return." Marcus lowered his eyes, tears glinting, while Danielle pressed her lips together, her breath shaky. They did not answer, but their silence carried the weight of something breaking open inside. The day ended with Clara surrounded by her new family. She walked hand in hand with children who called her name with joy, their laughter like bells ringing through the halls she had built. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, and in that light, Clara's figure stooped, wrapped in her old cardigan and her frayed scarf, shone brighter than any jewel. She had found her true family, not through blood, but through the boundless act of giving. And in her eyes, there was no regret, only peace, as though every wound had finally been healed by love. The story of Clara Johnson reminds us that true love is not measured in money or success, but in sacrifice, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of a mother's heart. She showed the world that family is not only blood, it is those who choose to stand by you, and that love is proven through actions, not words. Friends, as you reflect on this story, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. What does love mean to you, and how do you honor the sacrifices of those who raised you? If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and do not forget to subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, compassion, and the courage to never forget the ones who gave you everything.